Welcome everybody to the Aziz Foundation webinar. Yes, so welcome everybody to the Aziz Foundation webinar. We have Tasneem with us today and we are going to let her introduce herself. So Tasneem, feel free to introduce yourself.
I thought you'd be like introducing me, you know, but that's fine. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hi, my name is Tasneem Abdur-Rashid. As you guys know, I'm an Aziz Foundation scholar. I graduated earlier this year with an MA in creative writing from Birkbeck. And alhamdulillah, my debut novel, Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine, was released this summer on July 7th. And yes, I'm here to talk about my publication journey, how the masters helped me, how the wonderful people at the Aziz Foundation have been helping me and supporting me along the way, and just talk about how to get into publishing, how to write a book, and anything else that you guys are interested in, I'm here to talk about.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much. So for those of us who are unaware, Tasneem was one of our scholars. She did creative writing and she is one of my star scholars that I love promoting on our social media channels because she released her debut book, Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine, earlier this summer with Zafre Books, and it's been really exciting for us to see a Muslim woman doing really well in publishing and actually writing a rom-com. So I'm actually going to kick things off, Tasneem, and I'm actually going to ask you a few questions. So tell me about your writing and your career inspirations. So what was the moment that you thought, you know what, I really want to be a writer?
I think I've always known I've wanted to do this. I've been telling stories ever since I could, whether there were fibs and white lies to writing them down on paper. I've always been a storyteller, and it's something that my parents have really encouraged me ever since I was young. But I think, you know, growing up, you read, well, I read a lot. I read a lot of books. I was really into reading. I barely watched any TV and all I did was read. But despite how many books, the sheer amount of books that I read, I never found a character that I could really relate to. I never found a character that looked like me, that shared my experiences. So I'm talking growing up in the 90s. There was nothing. All the protagonists and every single book that I read were white. And most of the books I read were written by white writers. So I kind of gave up on the dream, thinking that it wasn't for someone like me. It wasn't possible for someone who looked like me to be able to kind of penetrate mainstream publishing. So I mean, I did my degree in creative writing, and then I went on and started a career in comms. So I worked in corporate communications. I worked for magazines. I lived in Dubai. I lived in Dubai for 7 years. So I worked for magazines there. I did comms there. I did PR. So basically, kind of like the whole communication spectrum. I worked across that. And when I moved back to the UK, I mean, doing like a master's in creative writing was something I'd wanted to do ever since I did my BA. But I got busy with the career. I got married. I had children, and I kind of thought I'd missed the boat until I saw somebody had shared the Aziz Foundation scholarship with me on a Facebook group I was on called Muslim Mamas. And when I saw that, I just felt like I had to apply for it. And that kind of propelled me back into creative writing again.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, that sounds fantastic. That sounds really great. And what kind of, there's something quite interesting a lot with sort of writers in general. And there's always the question of, should writers who want to write a book be formally trained in creative writing? Is that something that you would recommend to people getting that formal training?
I think it helps. I mean, obviously, by all means, you can be an amazing writer without that training. But I think being able to write and being able to craft a story are two different things. So I think it really helps to kind of learn that craft and learn what goes into a good story. It's not just the plot, it's the characters, it's the development of the characters, it's the conflict, it's dialogue, it's character arcs. You know, characters usually start off in one way and end up different by the end of the story. So they go through that journey. So there's loads of different kind of technical elements to writing a good story. And I think it is helpful. You don't need to do a master's or a degree in it. You could do like a creative writing course. But obviously, if you do a master's, it's a lot more in-depth, I would say, than just doing a course. So for me personally, I found it really helpful. But I don't think that is the be-all and end-all. I think you can definitely be a good writer without formal training in it.
Fantastic. That's so great to hear. Because I know there's a lot of us who are probably quite interested in, let's say, going from an aspiring writer to a published author. And I think that's what makes your journey so incredible, that we can see a British Muslim female writer who's gone out there and published a book with a really mainstream publisher. And that's something that I really wanted to speak to you a bit more about, actually. And I really wanted to ask you your experience of going from aspiring writer to a published author. Could you tell us the steps that led you there, and anything that you really learned from the process? Because I'm sure people are really inspired by your journey.
Yeah, of course. So as I mentioned, I got busy with my career in communications and I kind of parked the whole writing a book thing to the side. But it happened, so when my second child was born, he was 6 months old, and I was at home day in, day out with my children, just going through that endless cycle of cleaning, cooking, nappies, vomit, crying, the whole lot. And it was just relentless. And I was desperate to do something else that wasn't motherhood. I just needed to do something for me. I kind of forgot who I was apart from raising children. So it was when my baby was 6 months old. I was awake at night as usual. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The whole world was asleep. And I took out my laptop and I started to write the story that I've been wanting to write ever since, I was a teenager. So I started to write this story down. And what I did was, which is quite non-traditional, I used to upload chapters of the story onto a blog and then share it on various social media platforms I was on. And then quite quickly, a lot of people started reading the blog and they loved it and they were waiting. It was like they were watching a TV show and they'd be waiting every week for the new episode to come out. So every week I'd have feedback and people, instant feedback, and people telling me they needed the next chapter. And that kind of really encouraged me to carry on. So for me, that was a really good way to kind of sustain the interest I had. Because one thing a lot of people do, and I've done it before, is you start writing, right? You have all these great ambitions and you start writing, and 3 chapters in you give up and you kind of lose that momentum, and that initial feeling that you get and that excitement that you get kind of dies, and there needs to be something that makes you carry on writing when you want to stop. So for me, I think that was really important. The fact that I was getting feedback from people and people were waiting for it and were really enjoying the story kind of urged me to continue. So I did that for a while, and then I got to a point when I'd written half the book was online, and then I thought to myself, why am I giving away my whole book for free? I need to think about this seriously now. Now that I've written half of it, I know that I'm serious about the book. So I stopped posting chapters, I took down the blog, and then I carried on writing. And then while I was writing, I applied for the scholarship, because at that point I'm really into creative writing again after 15 years of not doing it. So yeah, I applied for the scholarship, applied for the university place, got in, and while I was going through that process, I'd finished writing the book. So about around the same time I started the MA, I started reaching out to agents. So what people traditionally do when trying to publish their book traditionally is to get an agent first. So most publishers, especially mainstream publishers, so independent publishers are a bit different, but most big publishers won't accept manuscripts that are unsolicited, which means they won't accept manuscripts from authors who aren't agented. So only agents can reach out to those editors at the publishing houses. So the first step for me was, because I wanted to be traditionally published, I didn't want to go down the self-publishing route either. So I started reaching out to agents. So there's a book called I think it's called the Writers and Artists Yearbook. And in that has a whole list of editors and agents in the UK, which can become outdated really quickly. So you can either look through that book or you can just Google search it and see who's out there. And then I made a list of agents I wanted to reach out to. So not all agents will represent clients who write from all genres. So you need to be careful about that. You need to find an agent who will represent writers from your genre. So I was writing a rom-com, so it's commercial fiction, women's fiction. So I reached out to agents who were looking at those genres. And then, then I started pitching to them. So what most agents ask for is a cover letter, a synopsis of your book, and the first 3 chapters. So that's quite standard. It might vary from agent to agent, but that's pretty much the industry standard. So I had to get a really good cover letter together, and in that cover letter, you need to explain who you are, any writing credentials you have. So it's not the place to be modest. You need to sell yourself, basically. You're pitching yourself here. So you talk about any writing experience you've had, anything you've published, any prizes you've won, all of that. And you talk about your book, like an elevator pitch of your book, what it's about. And one good thing to include in these letters is to kind of compare it to other books in the market. So one thing people who are looking to get published will notice is that they're always being asked, like, what is your book? Like, who's it going to sit next to on the shelf? So you include other books that are similar to your book. So the agent and later on the publishers can kind of envision how they're going to sell your book, because it all comes down to getting it sold, right? So you need to be kind of sellable. So that's your cover letter. Your synopsis just summarizes your whole book in a couple of pages, 2-3 pages, and you just kind of say everything that happens, like all the major plot points and main characters are introduced in that synopsis. And it's actually a really, really hard thing to do. Like, it's even harder than writing the book, because you've written like, what, 300-400 pages, and now you have to condense the whole thing in 2-3 pages and make it sound really interesting and exciting, so somebody wants to read the whole thing. So there's that, and then there's your first 3 chapters, which, you know, you need to perfect. They have to be really good, because these 3 chapters are going to make the agent want to read the rest of the book. So I had my submission package ready and I started sending it out to agents. Some people got back to me and wanted to read the whole manuscript. Other people came back with rejections, and yeah, so I went through that process really. And you know what, it's really hard because you do get a lot of rejections along the way. So you kind of have to really believe in yourself and your story, no matter how many times people say no, and just realize that it just takes one person to connect with your book and say yes. And that's what I kept doing. I kept hustling and I kept, you know, trying until I got there, alhamdulillah.
Thanks for that, Tasneem. That sounds really, really interesting. Thanks for breaking the agent and publishing process down. That, I hope, was really helpful to everybody. And you mentioned something that was really interesting. You mentioned that you had to have a lot of tenacity. You had to be quite comfortable almost with rejection, because it is a hard business. And something that I'm quite intrigued by is, how long would you say you had been pitching out to agents before, let's say, you started to get some interest? Did this take, let's say, a couple of months? Did it take some years? Did it take some weeks?
It was about, from when I started pitching to agents to when I got signed with my agency, I would say it was about 6-7 months.
Mm-hmm.
Alhamdulillah, it wasn't like really long. And what was really good, so I was pitching, right? And I'd started my course at this point. So I started the MA. And so I'd written this whole big fat book. And when I started the course and I spoke to my tutor, I had my first tutorial, and I told the tutor like what I was doing, what I'd written, and we kind of spoke about it. And then when I told her that I'd written like 160,000 words, she was horrified. And she was like, oh my God, like that's really long. Like for your genre, it should be between, say, 70 to maximum 100,000 words. And the fact that I'd written 160 meant that, you know, I'd written way too much. There were probably way too many plot lines going on, subplots, characters. Like there was just too much for my genre. And I really wish I had known this before, and I didn't. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why people were requesting my full manuscript and then reading it and rejecting me, because it was just too long. And because it was so long, it was messy. You know, there was just too much in there. So that's one thing that MA really, really helped me with, was kind of streamlining that process. So I'd workshop the chapter. So when you do a creative writing MA, what they do is every module you'd be asked to submit your writing, and then everybody in the class reads your work and they give you feedback on it. And it's called workshopping. And then your tutor also reads it and gives you feedback. And that is just priceless. You get 15 people, 16 people reading your work and giving you their expert opinions on it. And that's, people pay for that, you know. Well, I guess we do pay for that through the masters, but that is absolutely priceless. And so I was getting really good feedback on how to streamline my story, on how to cut it down, and my tutor really helped me come up with ideas on how I could cut it down. Mm-hmm. And then what happened was, during this process, I had sent out the pitch to the Good Literary Agency. So they're the ones I'm with now. So the Good Literary Agency was founded by a writer called Nikesh Shukla, who compiled The Good Immigrant, which is like an anthology of essays by British immigrants, basically. And he founded this agency solely with the purpose of kind of bringing underrepresented voices to the forefront. So I had reached out to them. They were like my dream agency basically, and I was too scared to reach out to them for ages because I was so scared of being rejected by them, and I really wanted a representation from them because I really believed in what they were doing. And so I sent it out to them while I was editing my book, and they came back with a full manuscript request. I sent them the full manuscript. And then the reader of the agency at the time, she emailed me and just said, look, you know what, your book is brilliant. I love it, but it's just too long and I can't send it on to one of the agents until you edit it. And then we had a meeting, we went for coffee, and she just basically told me, look, you need to get it down to under 100,000 words. If you can do that, then I will send it on to one of the agents. And having somebody tell me that was amazing. And the thing is, that girl, the girl who read it, the woman who read it, her name's Salma, and she's also Bengali. And she is probably the only Bengali who worked in a literary agency in the whole of the UK. The publishing industry is really homogenous. It's not very diverse. And I guess that's part of the process, is sending your book out to people who are reading it and can't relate to it and can't connect to it. But this was somebody who shared my background, and it was just, alhamdulillah, I mean, I call it divine intervention, the fact that she read it at that moment, because she left the agency a year later. So if I had sent my book a year later, maybe the person who would have read it at that point wouldn't have connected to it the way Salma did. So she gave me some really good advice on how to cut the book down. And I did that. I got it within like 2-3 months. I got it down to like 95,000 words. I don't know how, well, I do know actually. I got rid of, 40,000 words, basically 45,000 words. And I did it through just cutting out characters, cutting out plot lines. I was really, really ruthless. And I did that. And she read it and she said, this is great. I can send this on. And then she sent it on to the agents, and they read it and they loved it, and they signed me. So I got signed just before the pandemic. Actually, it was during the pandemic. It was like March or April. So we did everything over Zoom. And alhamdulillah, it was amazing just having that, because once you get an agent, you're so much closer to achieving your dream of publication. It's not a done deal, but it's close. It's the closest you can get to a done deal. And up to that point, it's just a pipe dream. It's just a dream that so many million people have, and they never get to achieve it. So getting the agent, it was amazing. Alhamdulillah, I'm so grateful for that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Tasneem. That was really, really helpful hearing about your agent process. And it's really great as well. Something I really want to pick up on was you talked about how you had found someone working in the literary world who really was able to connect with your character. And I really wanted to talk to you about sort of Muslim representation in books and your experience of, let's say, writing like visibly and quite visibly Muslim characters. Did you find any issues with, let's say, agents for publishers trying to shape your book in a way that you were not happy with? And what kind of advice would you give to people who, let's say, may not have had, let's say, as positive experiences as you did, and they might be sending their book on and they're getting responses with people saying, oh, we might have changed the characters, they don't quite relate? What kind of advice would you give, and for if someone didn't have the exact experience as you?
So with me, I was lucky, like I said, because I had someone Bengali who read the book, but she also gave me some really good advice, and which some people might not have taken on board because they wouldn't have wanted to change their book at all. But she's basically told me, look, all your characters in your book are like Asian, pretty much, and Muslim. And she said, you need a character in there that she told me I needed more diverse characters. And she said, you need somebody, at least one person who's white, who has a good role in the book, a big-ish role. They don't have to be a main character, but there needs to be some kind of presence, because she said the industry isn't diverse at all. And you're going to be coming across editors who read it and won't be able to connect to anything. And you need some things that they can connect to. So she told me that, and I was like, oh my God, like I was completely blown away by that, because it was something I hadn't even thought of. So I did that. I took her advice on board, and one of my secondary characters, who was my protagonist colleague at work, I just developed her character and I made her a little bit bigger than I had originally done, and gave her more of a role in the book. So I was happy to take on that feedback. But if it was something bigger than that, if it was something that I would see as compromising the integrity of my story, I don't think I would have been comfortable with that. And in terms of advice, I'll say that you can only write what feels comfortable to you. You have to write something that you're going to be proud of, because you're going to sell that book afterwards. You're going to be talking about that book. You'll be going on, going to events, talking at seminars, talking at webinars like I'm doing now. And you have to believe in what you've done, and you have to have written something that with integrity, and you have to have written something that you believe in and that you're proud of. So personally, if somebody had asked me to do something that I wasn't comfortable with, and then I wouldn't do it. I don't think it's worth it for me to sacrifice that. But it's really sad. It's really sad that we're in a place where we're so underrepresented that we're put into this corner, and sometimes it's either fight or flight, basically. So it's a really uncomfortable place to be in. In terms of Muslim representation in books, I do feel like we're very, very slowly getting there. The situation is so much better now than it was 5 years ago. And I just hope and pray that in 5 years' time, it's going to be even better than now. And I hope people like me and other writers, people of color and writers of color and Muslim writers, are getting the opportunity to share their stories in the way that they feel comfortable with. And inshallah, that will continue paving the way for everybody else.
Thank you for that, Tasneem. That sounds fantastic and really wonderful. And it was really interesting to hear about your views on how you shouldn't compromise the integrity of your book. And it's definitely a lesson that we can all learn from. And I really wanted to talk about something that you discussed a little bit earlier. And you discussed workshopping in your degree, which sounded really great. What kind of advice would you give to people, let's say, that maybe writing for them is more of a solitary hobby? They might not have, let's say, a support network. Like, let's say, a writers group, they may not have that, or they may not have fellow friends who are writers. So what they do is maybe quite solitary and with themselves at night, maybe. What kind of advice would you give to people who may want to reach out to other people, but maybe feel a bit shy, want to share their work, but feel a bit anxious doing that?
Okay, I would say that it is really important to have some kind of writing group, especially if you're not on a course or you've not had any kind of formal training. It would be really, really helpful to find a group. There are so many groups online now, and it's so much better that way, because you don't have to feel as vulnerable, because obviously you're behind a screen, and it's just that little bit easier than going to a writers group and meeting people face to face and having people analyze your book right in front of you. Like in the course, in the MA, when we were workshopped, people will talk about your book when you're there, and the policy was, for my course anyway, was that we couldn't respond. So we just had to sit there like a fly on the wall and listen to everyone discuss our book, basically. And right at the end, we had a chance to explain why we'd done the things that we'd done. So I think now going online would make it so much easier. It's a little bit easier to be more vulnerable that way. So on Facebook itself, I know Facebook is like old, maybe for you guys are like too young, but in my generation, Facebook is still very rife. We still use it. And there are groups. So there's one group called Muslim Writers, and it was set up by a writer called Naima B. Robert, and she wrote a book years ago called From My Sister's Lips about the Reva experience. And so she's set up, she's got loads of kind of like little courses and seminars and things that she does, and she set up this group online, and people share their work on that group. They share their work and they get feedback from people on there as well, and they go off and create their own little subgroups from there. So that's one thing. I've also seen on Eventbrite, there are lots of different writers groups in different areas. So if you are comfortable with meeting people in real life, I'll definitely recommend going off and doing that. Also, there are like some literary agencies that run workshops and things. I think Curtis Brown is one of them. And I know people who have done a short course with them, and then they've gone off and become friends with the other people on the course, and they've started their own writing group through that process as well. But I would say that, yeah, writing is solitary, but I would say that being an author isn't. So it's really important to kind of become comfortable. And inshallah, when you get to the stage of your work being published and you go from being a writer to an author, you'd be more comfortable talking about your work in public because you've already been doing it through the workshopping process.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that sounds fantastic. That sounds really great. And actually, that brings me on to a new question, actually. And since your book's been released, which has been really fantastic and really exciting, have you found yourself going online? And if you see, let's say, how would you navigate if, let's say, you found any criticism about your work? What kind of advice would you give to people who may feel quite scared about getting, let's say, negative criticism or feedback? What's been your experience of dealing with that?
Okay, so at first I found it really hard. I know it's only been like 3 months, but your skin grows thicker and thicker every day. So alhamdulillah, I'm lucky in the sense that most of the feedback has been brilliant, and like every day people send me DMs on Instagram or wherever, and telling me that they've read my book and they can relate to it and they can connect to it and they've enjoyed it, or it made them laugh out loud. Or they're now reading after Twitter, because I get a lot of people my age, right, reading the book, like people from my communities, my circles, and some of them haven't picked up a book in like 20 years. And when they say, you know what, I haven't read a book since my GCSEs and I've gone and bought your book and I loved it and I want to read now, stuff like that, it's just amazing. The feeling is absolutely incredible. And then on the other end of the spectrum, obviously you get a few people who don't enjoy your book. And at first I found it really, really hard. I think because you put yourself out there, right? You've bared your soul on paper and you've made yourself really vulnerable, and you've put your story out there, and it's not just your story, it's a part of you, it's a piece of you out there in the world. And if somebody reads it and comes and says that they don't like it, you feel as if they don't like you. And at the beginning, for the first like 2 or 3, I found it really, really hard, especially because, as you can see, I'm Muslim, I'm a visible Muslim. I'm so proud of being a Muslim and I'm proud of wearing hijab. And somebody read my book and said that they didn't like the representation of hijab in my book. And that to me just felt like a stab in the heart. I was like, what the hell? Have I written a book that has misrepresented hijab? Like, me as a hijabi myself, who's been wearing hijab for like 15 years, 20 years. And to have that was really, really painful. But then after a while, you kind of realize that, you know what, like everybody is so different and everybody understands things in different ways. And there will be people that are going to read your work and not going to like it. And it's completely okay, because you can't expect everyone to like it, just like you can't expect everyone you meet to like you. You can't expect everyone to read your work and like it. And you can go and read the best book in the world, like what you think is the best book in the world, and there will be somebody out there who hated it. And that's just the nature of it. It's the nature. I know it sounds really poncy, but art is subjective, and that's what it is. And you've got to realize that it's not personal. If somebody doesn't like your work, it's absolutely not personal. And for every person who doesn't like it, there are 20 people that do like it. And you just have to focus on that. One way of dealing with it, so I've been speaking to other writers and I'm like, how do you guys cope? And so many people, and I was surprised actually, so many people came back and said to me, you know what, we don't even read reviews. They're like, we do not read reviews. We don't go hunting for our reviews. We don't go on Amazon and start reading them. We don't go on Goodreads and start reading them, because it's really difficult and it just can put you in a really bad headspace. So one way is just not even looking at it. Like, you know what, it doesn't even matter. It's your book. You should, the fact that you've got it published and it's out there and most people like it, that should be enough. And I know it's easier said than done, but alhamdulillah, it works. Like, it's been 3 months now, and now it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me at all, because you'll always find somebody who's going to criticize something, and that's okay. So long as most people like it and most people enjoy it, then the rest is just, it's no skin off your back.
Thanks, Tasneem. And yeah, I have actually noticed all the amazing feedback you've been receiving. There was quite a really great story of Tasneem being spotted. I think was it in your local supermarket.
And oh my God, yeah. That was so
really
embarrassing, guys. That was so embarrassing. I just come out from the gym. I was in my tracksuit and my glasses, and I was sweaty and red, and all I wanted was some eggs and some milk and some sujuk. Right, and the woman behind the checkout was like, "Are you Tasneem?" And I was like, "Yes." Like, who's asking, kind of thing. But it was just such a surreal moment. Like, how the hell did that happen? Like, I don't even know. But afterwards, I was happy as well, because I was like, she recognized me. It means I'm not a catfish, So yeah, alhamdulillah, it's good. It was a good moment. You know what? There's been so many highs. Alhamdulillah, there have been so many highs. I wouldn't change it for anything.
Oh, brilliant. And what would you say has been your biggest high?
It's just it's the response. It's absolutely the response. It's just getting those messages from people like me, who are from, underrepresented communities, who've never seen themselves. Like, I think my book is the first book with the Sylheti language in it, because Sylheti is a dialect of Bangladesh, and it's a huge one, especially in the UK. Most Bengalis in the UK are from the Sylhet region. And how is it possible that we've gone all this time and we haven't had books with people like us in it? So just having people like me read my book and just feel so seen, has been amazing, because that's what I wanted to do. That was my, that's all I wanted to achieve. Like, it didn't matter, nothing mattered but getting that out there and getting my voice and my culture's voice and Islam out there. And I did that, and people are just, have been blown away by it. And, to read it and to see the Sylheti dialect in the book for the first time ever, it's just, it's such a magical feeling. So I think that is definitely the biggest.
That's so wonderful to hear. That really is. That's so fantastic. And you've mentioned quite a lot of things throughout this discussion, and it's quite clear that you've got a lot of passion, you've got a lot of tenacity. What kind of qualities do you think someone who is really trying to break in the industry, what kind of qualities do you think they need to either hone or need to have to, because it is quite a difficult industry to penetrate?
I think you just have most important thing is to have perseverance.
Mhm.
You can't give up. Like, you just have to keep at it. And I think it sounds like something easy, but it's not. Like, when you've received your 5th or 6th rejection in a row, you really start doubting yourself, and you really start wondering if this is the right industry for you. And I think you just can't give up. Like, especially if you have honed your craft, people have read your work, other writers have read your work, and they're telling you, look, this is good. Yeah, this needs to be out there. And then you're still getting rejections. I think it's important to realize that everything is so subjective, and you just need just one person at the right time to read it. And that's all you need. It can change everything. So I think the main thing is like not giving up. All the rest of it is all secondary. So, I mean, yeah, I'm quite, like you said, I'm quite a tenacious character, and it's helped in the sense that I'm not afraid of the camera, and I'm not afraid of meeting people and talking to people. But you don't have to be like that to be a good writer. You don't have to be that at all. You just need to be a good writer. You need to be able to tell a story, and that is the main thing. And that's why you'll get introverts who are absolutely amazing and they do so well, because their writing just speaks for itself. In this day and age, having a social media presence does help a bit. It does help because it shows publishers that you have an audience already. I didn't have that. I started all my social stuff new. Like, once I got my contract at the agency, that's when I started doing stuff on social media. Before that, I didn't. It was all very, very personal. But it does help. It does help if you have that. And it helps if you're confident, and it helps if you don't mind meeting people and going into crowds and talking to people, because it's all about exposure. The more you get seen, the more people remember you, the more you'll get invited to speak at events and conferences and, that kind of thing. And it's really important to get yourself out there, but it's not everything. So don't feel like you have to be like this big character in order to make it. You don't.
Oh, that's great, because there is a lot of pressure nowadays with social media to kind of be the loudest person in the room. So that's really good to know that you don't necessarily have to do that. It's more that your work can speak for itself. But it would be quite useful, wouldn't it, to have already an existing social media presence. Something I really wanted to touch on is that your book is a rom-com, which is very exciting. And that's something that I personally was very excited about. With a lot of books that I read, let's say, that discuss, let's say, British Muslims or Muslims in general, sometimes they can center on pain or trauma or things that publishers want to hear from, but actually rom-coms are something that our community, we really want to read about. People, Muslim women, Muslim people in rom-coms, and I think that's what makes your book so exciting. And I really want to ask you, what would you say inspired you to create your book? Was there a particular moment that you go, you know what, this is what I'm going to write? And was it a thing as well that you deviated away from, let's say, writing about something more serious, and actually you said, you know what, I want to write a rom-com with a British Muslim female?
So I didn't plan it like that. So I knew what I wanted the story to be like. So my story is about a Bengali girl from London called Zara. She's 29 years old, and she has a year to find a husband. So her mom's basically given her an ultimatum that if she doesn't find a man by her 30th birthday, she's being shipped off to Bangladesh, and they're going to find her a husband from there. And it's something that a lot of people that I know have been through, not necessarily with the deadline of a year, but the pressure intensifies in our community and in our culture. That pressure intensifies every year that passes, and the older you get, the harder it becomes, and you're kind of seen as if your expiry date is fast approaching. And so ever since I reached like the marriageable age, I'd wanted to write that story because I feel like it's such a unique experience, especially the Bengali version of it. We have I should say it's pretty advanced, our arranged marriage scene. We've got like things that we call biodatas that we put together, that kind of like, that's basically a marriage CV, and then people circulate these marriage CVs that have pictures and all the details on them, and they like match people together based on that. So I really wanted to create something that could capture that captures the essence of finding a partner the British Bengali Muslim way. But when I started writing it, I didn't know it was going to be a rom-com. Like, I just knew I wanted to write a story about this. And that's all I knew. And when I started writing it, it just kind of became funny. Because you know what? It's such the process, you can either laugh or you can cry about it. It can be really soul destroying, or it can be pretty funny. So it's kind of like a combination of the two. So as I started writing it in that style, the style just developed and I started really enjoying it. And then I started thinking, you know what, this is what's lacking in Muslim literature today. It's this light-hearted touch. Like, everything is so serious and everything was so doom and gloom, and it was the same kind of story again and again. And I wanted to break away from that, and I wanted the culture and the Islamic side of it, everything in the story, to be secondary to the main story, like a traditional rom-com. As rom-com is like boy meets girl, right? And I wanted that, and I wanted the culture and everything to be secondary to that, and I wanted it to be completely unapologetic. You know, this is who we are. We're proud of who we are. We're not having conflicts of faith every 5 seconds. You know, we're Muslims and we're proud of being Muslims and we're firm in our faith, but we're also really funny and we have insecurities. We want to get married and we want to have children. We want to meet somebody. We want to love somebody. We want to have settled down, all of that. But we've got family pressures and we've got careers and we've got all of this stuff going on. So I really wanted to kind of capture that. So yeah, I didn't go out setting to do that, but as I wrote, the more I wrote, and like I said, I used to post chapters online, and the more feedback I got, the more I realized I was onto a good thing, and I just wanted, yeah, to keep going. And alhamdulillah, like, people have found it really funny. I didn't even know I was that funny, like, because I've read it obviously like so many times now, and I've edited it so many times. I'm kind of sick of it, to be honest. So when people come to me, they're like, oh my God, it was so funny, I laughed out loud and all of this, and I was like, oh, okay, thanks. I didn't know.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of really great reception to that, about it being so funny, and it's so brilliant to see that, and it's so great that, because there's a lot of perceptions that as Muslims that we need to be writing about things like pain and trauma, but actually we are more than that. We can be funny, we can be larger than life, as your characters have proven. So it's fantastic that you've written this and it's out in the world. And I'm gonna move on to my next question. I'm gonna, in about 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, I will probably let there be time for Q&A. But as you've proven, you're extremely successful in your industry, and you've really made a name for yourself. What kind of advice would you give to really aspiring writers who are right at the beginning of their career? Maybe they've written a few chapters, maybe they want to start writing a book, but have no idea where to go. So what kind of advice would you give to people to break into the industry that just are quite unaware of how to go from, let's say, sitting at home writing a chapter or two and wondering how do they get their book, like you in Waterstones?
I would say you need to write the whole book. Like, a chapter or two is great, but you need to sustain it and you need to get to the end. And I would say that if you've had no kind of formal training in creative writing, I think it would be really, really useful to sign up to a course. You know, there are really, like, there's lots of amazing Muslim writers out there who hold courses themselves. There's a writer called Huma Qureshi. She's amazing. She wrote a memoir called How We Met, and she wrote a short story collection called Things We Do Not Tell the People We Love, which both of them are brilliant books. And she actually holds like masterclasses for aspiring writers. So you don't have to commit, I would say, to like a really expensive course or anything, but just maybe do a couple of masterclasses here or there, just to kind of know about structure, because structure is really important, and just to kind of learn the technical side of it. I'd say if you've got an idea in your mind, it's really important to kind of plot it a little bit, and don't do what I did. Don't write 50,000 extra words for no reason because you didn't plan the book properly at the beginning, and then go back and plan it after you've written it. I'd really recommend kind of planning it. It doesn't have to be like a point by point, chapter by chapter plan, but just have an idea of where your story is starting, what you want the crisis and the conflict to be, and what you want the ending to be like, and plot that out. And then, yeah, you just have to write, even if it's half an hour a day, an hour a day, 20 minutes a day. You kind of need to set aside time every day and take it seriously, because if you seriously want to be a published writer, you've got to adhere to deadlines, you've got to juggle multiple projects at the same time. When I wrote Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine, the second half of the book, so the first half, yeah, I was chilling, right? I was at home, well, not chilling, I had my babies, but I was just doing that. But the second half of the book, I wrote it whilst I had a full-time job. So I used to work in the PR department of Bernardo's. So I had a full-time job, I had 2 small children, and then I was writing this book, I was doing the MA. So I had so many things going on at the same time, and I had to force myself sometimes to go and write. And that's what you have to do. Like, you don't wait for inspiration to hit you. You don't wait till you're in solitude. You don't get to rent a cottage by the sea and stare out the window and write all these amazing things. It's not like that. Like, you just got to get on with it, whatever time it is, you just get on with it. So if you're serious, I'd say you have to do that. Make time for it, write it. And yeah, find your writer circle, go online, attend writing classes or groups, and get that circle together who can read your work and give you feedback on it. And yeah, once that's done, then it's the whole agent process and everything.
That sounds great. Those are really great tips. So thank you for that, Tasneem. And I wanted to ask you another question. So I know that you've actually landed yourself a 2-book deal, which is really, really exciting. And I'm actually really looking forward to your second one now. Are you able to share anything about that? Are you able to give us a little teaser, a little preview?
So it's also another rom-com. It's another rom-com. It's also got another, like, a Bengali protagonist. It's a different family, different. It's still North London. Like, I'm a North Londoner. Like, it's gonna happen. But it's a different family, and yeah, it's another, like, another love story, but very different from Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine. So she's not looking for love, this one. And what can I say? I don't know if I want to share anything else. Yeah, you'll find out. You guys add me on Instagram, yeah, and you'll find out eventually what's happening.
Yes, so feel free to put your Instagram in the chat, Tasneem, or while I open up the floor in a second. But yeah, no, thank you for this. This has been really, really illuminating, and so I really just want to say a huge thank you, because you really inspired and we just really want to say thank you for answering my questions. But now I really want to open up the floor for Tasneem to answer any burning questions that you might have. And feel free to raise your hand, or feel free to DM me directly, and I can answer, and I can ask Tasneem on your behalf. So over to you, everyone.
Let's see, are there any questions?
Don't be shy, anyone. All right, we've got one here. A great question from Samra. So thanks, that Samra. She asked, to understand your genre, did you read a lot around your genre? How did you go about researching for your book if you needed to?
That's a really good question. Yes, I did. So I read a lot of rom-coms. There aren't a lot of rom-coms with Muslim characters, unfortunately. And so that part of it, I found it a little bit tricky to navigate, because obviously when you read non-Muslim rom-coms, there's, a few naughty things in there. And I was like, okay, how am I going to navigate that? Keep it interesting without all of that. So that was a bit tricky, but yeah, I did read a lot. I read a lot around the genre. And in terms of researching, so because my book was about somebody who's looking for a husband, what I did was I kind of interviewed, I call it interviewed, it was a lot less formal than that, but I spoke to a lot of Muslim women who are looking for husbands, who had recently got married, to find out what the scene was like now, because I got married 12 years ago, so things have changed a lot in the last 12 years. So I spoke to a lot of people who are currently looking or had recently got married to find out what their experiences is. So the stuff that happens in my book, a lot of it is based on things that have really happened to people. So like Zara, she meets one guy who sends her a questionnaire to fill out. That happened. She goes to a networking event, a chocolate making networking event that was loosely described as networking. Really, it was a marriage event. Yeah, that's real. There's the app, she goes on an app to find somebody, like all of that was based on a true story, like being catfished online and all of that. So a lot of the little incidents that happen throughout the story are based on things that have happened to people that I interviewed and spoke to. Yeah, so I did do that, but I didn't have to do as much research as, for example, if you're writing historical fiction. Obviously, there's so much you have to do there, just creating the world. My world was already built, really. It was just the characters and the stories that I needed to create.
And thank you for that, Tasneem. That sounds great. And we've actually got another question, actually. And let me just get that question out there. And Nazreen actually says, hi, Nazreen. She's one of our new scholars. Could you touch on your writing process? And also, how did publishing your first book change your process, if at all? That's a great question. Thanks for asking that.
I'm writing in a completely different way than I wrote my first book. Firstly, the first one, when you write your first book, you're not on deadline, right? You've just got your idea, you've got your story, you've got all the time in the world to do it. So that's what I did. And this one is very different. My book's due in at the end of December, and I've only written like a third of it. So I'm like writing every day. I'm very, very regimented in the way I write now. And I've realized that your first draft is never, ever, ever going to be the draft that anybody sees. It changes so much from your first draft to what the public get to see at the end. It goes through so many rounds of edits. I went through, I think, 2 or 3 rounds of edits with my agent. And then with the editor at the publishing house, I think we did another 3 rounds of edits, like 1 structural and 1 copy edit and a proof edit. So yeah, about six rounds of edits with other people. And that's not even including the editing I did myself before anyone even got to see that. So you go through so many edits. The first chapter that you write now is probably not going to be your first chapter of the book later. That might be chapter 3 or 4. So the way I write now is really different. I look at things differently. And what I'm doing now is I'm just getting the bones out there. Just writing at the bones, and then because I know once I finish that, to go back and add meat to the bones will be so much easier than trying to make everything perfect from now. So that's how I'm approaching it anyway. And actually, my agent, I sent her the first 10 chapters of this book just to have a look at, to see if she was happy with what I was doing. And she came back to me and she said, you know what, your writing and your structure is so much tighter than it was the first time round. And hearing that made me really happy, because it made me realize that I've grown a lot throughout the process, throughout doing the MA, and then obviously all those rounds of edits has really helped. So yeah, so like I mentioned before, in the first book, I didn't really plan it. So this time around, I have planned it. So I know what's happening, but you know what? I still don't know the ending. Like, I never really have a firm ending in mind until I get closer to the point, because you kind of have to let your characters grow and breathe on their own, and then you see what they would do in the end. You can't really dictate it to them. So yeah, I would say my writing process has definitely changed. It's much more structured now. It's much more organized now, and I know I'm doing a lot more than I did the first time, alhamdulillah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Tasneem. That sounds fantastic. And we've actually got a question from Sajida, and she asked, how did you develop the characters from your book? And did you have any techniques for making them multi-dimensional? And was it hard finishing the book and moving on to a new book with new characters? That's a fantastic question too. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so in terms of the characters, so I did something that we were taught during my undergrad in creative writing. So we were always taught to create characters and know everything about them. So I didn't know everything about them, but the characters that would come to mind, I'd write them down. So I'd put down their name, how old they were, how tall they were, what they look like, what they like to read, what they like to watch, what they like to eat, who their best friend was, and like their personality traits. So I did that. And so that was just the bare bones of it. And as I started writing it, and as you start writing, different things will transpire about the characters. And you realize that, okay, no, actually, this one's a bit too flat. They need more. So you realize that no one can be perfect. And it's really important to have flawed characters to make them believable. So then I would make them a little bit more flawed. And one thing I really love doing is writing dialogue. So I think that's what really brings characters to life, is the way they speak, and to have different characters speak in a different way and to say different things. And all of that will happen as you're writing the book. Like you can plan it a little bit, but as you're writing, you'll see it happen. And I think it's a really good idea to read the dialogue out loud and to see how it sounds, because it can't sound exactly how we speak. You don't write a dialogue in the same way that we speak it. So you have to do it in a way that sounds believable when you're reading it, but it's not exactly how it's spoken in real life. But yeah, as you read it out loud, you hear it and you can see what sounds authentic and what doesn't sound authentic. Yeah, so that's what I did. What was the second part of the question?
Sure. So the second part of the question was it hard finishing the book and moving on to a new book with new characters?
Oh my God, you know what? It's like having whiplash. So what happened was, well, after I finished writing Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine, I was doing my I was in the middle of the MA, right? And I wrote a different book during my MA for my dissertation. So I actually wrote a young adult book. And the young adult book was in my mind, is still in my mind because I'm editing that at the moment, and I'm writing the new one, and I've obviously got the last one. So I've got 3 books in my head at the moment with 3 different Bengali families in North London, right? 2 of them are written in the present tense, 1 of them is written in the past tense, 1's a YA, 2 are women's, right? And all of that's going in my head, and sometimes it's really confusing, like I write the wrong thing, or I accidentally go back to present when I'm writing in the past, or like I've got 2 grandmas in 2 of the books. And the nanny in Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine is based on my nanny, but the nanny in my YA book is based on my mum. And so that was confusing because in the YA one, she's a teenager. So the girl's based on my niece, and now the nanny's my mum, whereas it's just confusing, man. So yeah, I'm constantly getting muddled up and confused between the stories. But alhamdulillah, like I feel like it's a good problem to have.
Oh, great. Thank you for that, Tasneem. And that does sound a little confusing, doesn't it?
It really is.
We've got a question from Bushra, and this one's about voices, actually, which is I'm going to be intrigued to find out your answer. How did you find your own voice and differentiate your writing from the other authors out there?
You know what? It's really funny because I feel like your own voice will just come to you as you're writing, and you won't have to do anything that's trying to differentiate yourself from other people. It will just happen, just how we all speak in a different way and we all carry ourselves in a different way. I think my voice, it just developed itself the more I wrote. And I think the more you write, the more you kind of get a tone. But having said that, like the tone of the book I'm writing now is different from the other one. And so I think each book has its own tone. So while you have your style, and your style is very much yours, the tone of the book can be a bit different depending on the characters and the story that you're telling. And I was actually, the first book I wrote with Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine, I was really scared about reading Muslim rom-coms. Like there was one other Muslim rom-com at the time of me writing it, which was called Sophia Khan Is Not Obliged. And I was actually scared of reading it because I thought if I read it, it's going to influence my own writing, and I don't want it to do that. But now I don't believe that to be true. I don't think it can influence you. I think it just helps you grow. And I think it's really important to read widely. And yeah, it will definitely help you grow as a writer, and you'll find your voice as you write. The more you write, it will come to you.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Tasneem. I believe we've got another question, so let me just get that. Yes, and Mubin's actually giving you some fantastic feedback, Tasneem, so thanks for that. Mubin, that's really kind of you. Has anyone got any other questions for Tasneem, whether that's about the publication journey, about writing narratives, any challenges or pitfalls or anything like that? And we've still got a couple of minutes, so we're more than happy to take a few more questions. If you're unable to write this in the chat, feel free to WhatsApp me if you have my phone number. Otherwise, Tasneem, you're going to be hearing a couple more from me. While we wait for a few more people to get back to us, I actually really wanted to ask you, because I really, really love it when authors first see their book in real life. They do that video, they're like, this is seeing it in real life. I love seeing that. What was your experience of seeing your book when you first went to the bookstore, when it was delivered to yours? What did that feel like?
It was really emotional. Like when I got so I knew a package was going to come any day now. And when the box came, and I just knew automatically this wasn't one of my random ASOS or Amazon orders in the middle of the night. Like, this is my book, right? And I was by myself at home. And originally I thought I was going to do this whole unboxing video for social media, but I couldn't be bothered to even do that. Like I just grabbed it and I opened it up and I took it out, and just seeing it, it was almost like holding your baby. You know, when you hold your baby for the first time and you get so emotional and you have so much love and you just feel like so much effort went into creating this. It was like that. It was such an amazing experience. And then seeing it in the bookshop, seeing it in Waterstones for the first time, that was just surreal. I just felt so surreal. Like I went into it by myself, into the shop on my own, and I saw it and I was like, oh my God, like that's my book and nobody knows it's mine. Like, and then I kind of took it out and I kind of like put it in a place that was prominent. And then I kind of like skulked out of the shop like I'd done something really naughty. But that was amazing. And I think another thing that was really amazing was when I was signing books for the first time. So I did an event, this gala, and there were like stalls and stuff, and my publishers came, not my publishers, sorry, an independent bookstore came and they sold my books at the event. And it was my first event, and I sold so many books and I signed so many books that day, and that was a real amazing surreal moment as well, because it was, you proper feel like a celebrity at that moment, and you just can't believe that you're there living that life, the life that you've always dreamed of. Like I never thought it would happen to me. Like, yeah, I dreamt of it and I was trying to get there, but I didn't actually think it would happen. So alhamdulillah, I'm so happy.
Oh, that sounds so great. And we've actually got another question. How did your nanny and mum feel about being in your book?
Okay, so my nanny, she actually passed away. So she passed away during the first lockdown, just soon after I'd finished writing the book. And that's why I've dedicated the book to her. But everyone loves the nanny, by the way. Everybody who's read the book, they're like, oh my God, the nanny's amazing. And then my mum gets really jealous. She's like, everyone loves the nanny. No one likes the mum. So the mom, she is based a bit on my mom, but I've made her like bigger than my mom. I made her more larger than life. I make her say a lot more dodgy things that my mom says, but there are traits of hers that are similar to things that my mom does. And at the beginning, I was a bit worried. Like I thought, but I just tell everyone it's fiction, isn't it? And I kept telling my mom it's fiction, it's not really her. And she's like, are you sure? Like, how come she eats like Tyrrell's mature cheddar crisps like I do? I'm like, yeah, mom, she just does that, but it's not you. It's just, this is Zara's mom, you know? So I kind of fob her off a little bit and pretend it's not her. But there are bits and pieces that are based on her. But because it's not really her, like it's just little bits inspired by her, I feel okay. I think if I made a character that was solely based on someone else, I think that's very different. You'd have to be very careful then. Well, I would have to be very careful because I love my family. I don't want to upset them. But I guess if you don't, it doesn't matter. You can write anything you want really then. But yeah, you have to be. If you're writing, like, so mine's fiction, right? But if you're writing a memoir, it's a very different story. And I've heard talks by writers who've written memoirs about how difficult it was for them to write this story and put it out there, knowing that people were going to read it and they were going to get a lot of backlash from it, especially if there were negative stories. So I don't know, would I ever write a memoir? Because of that reason, probably not. I'd probably be too scared. I'm quite happy in my fiction corner at the moment.
Thank you for that, Tasneem. All right, we've got two more questions. And we've got a really great question as well from Nazrin, who says, what was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
I think I was really young when I realized that. And I think it was because my dad, when I was younger, used to get me to write letters for him. And so he's a finance person, my dad. He was like the director of finance for a housing association, and his writing wasn't great. And from a very young age, he used to get me to write his letters for him. And I think I'd written a letter once, and then he was really happy with it. And I can't remember the problem. I was really young. I must have been like 11 or something like that at the time. And he got what he wanted, like from the letter that I'd written. And I think at that moment, I realized that how important it was to use the right words and how you could shape a whole argument just by using the right words. I think probably the earliest experience I had. And then growing up as a teenager, like I realized how important it was. Obviously, when you're arguing your case at home, right? When you want something, you want a new pair of £100 trainers, and your dad's like, no. And then you have to really shape your argument to get what you want, you know. And I always used to manage to do that without having to cry and scream. So yeah, I think I learned quite early on that how powerful language is.
Great. Oh, thank you. That sounds amazing. And we've got one last question from Samra. And I'm actually really intrigued by this myself because I love your front cover. How involved were you in the creation of the cover of your book? And how far into the process did you pick the title?
Okay, so I'll start with the title because that was really difficult. So originally, I'm really bad at titles, by the way. Like, yeah, I can write you 200,000 words, but tell me to write a title, and it's like the hardest thing I can do. Like, even when I worked for magazines, like I used to find titles really, really difficult. So I had a rubbish title for my book, and I knew it would be changed. And it was after I finished writing this, but it took a really long time for everyone to agree on a title. So no one could think of a good title. Like everyone in my agency, everyone at my publishers, they were all brainstorming for weeks and weeks and weeks. And yeah, it was really difficult. So it was actually after the book had come out, and that kind of actually stalled the process a bit. Like the title and the cover delayed a lot of things for me because it took so long to finalize, which wasn't great because we had a short timeline lead time anyway. By the way, from when you've given your book to your editor and the publishing house to when it comes out, it's about a year. So it's a really long time. And it delayed that because it was taking so long. And in terms of the cover, so I was really lucky in that my publishers did allow me to have a lot of input in the cover, but I've heard experiences where other writers haven't, and they've ended up with covers that they've absolutely hated. And one writer I spoke to actually said that because of that first experience that she had with her first book, from then on, she always made sure that it was added in the contract that she had to approve the final cover. They couldn't just put out a cover that she wasn't happy with. So that's an important thing to know. For me, the first round of cover designs I absolutely hated. I thought it was horrible. Like I literally wanted to cry. When they sent me the email and I saw the cover, I looked at it and I was like, I will not tell anybody this book is mine. Like if that's the cover that it goes out with, I will never tell anyone it's mine. It's just going to die a small, slow death. I was so embarrassed of that cover. It was horrible, in my opinion. Maybe somebody else would have liked it, but I just didn't like it at all. And then I went back and I kind of like said what I wanted. And I was quite clear. I was like, I want the title in the middle like this. I want two drawn characters standing on the title on a London skyline along the bottom. Like literally just told them everything. And then alhamdulillah, they listened and they did it and they chose the colors they wanted and I loved them. Like when they came back to me with that yellow and the blue and the pink, I absolutely loved it. I was really, really happy with it, alhamdulillah. And now I've got trainers. So yeah, it's all good. I said, and now I've got matching trainers that match my cover. Because I'm like cheesy like that, and I just love the cover now. I'm so proud of it, and I think it's really, really important that as a writer that you are proud of your cover and you're proud of your work, because you have to sell that work later on. You have to be able to hold it up with pride at events, on your social media, at wherever, you know, and talk about it. You can't look at it and shrink from it and turn it the other way around because you don't want to look at it, you know. So that is something important to note.
All right, fantastic. All right, I believe we have sadly the end of this, but Tasneem, you have been amazing and wonderful to speak to. It has been such. I can't believe the hour has gone by. It has really.
I know. How did it just fly by? I didn't know I could talk so much.
It's been so illuminating, and I'm absolutely sure this can be so useful to everyone listening. And I just really want to say thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your insights into the publication journey. We've had some incredible feedback already. Saj, I wanted to relay a huge thank you for sharing your experience of writing in such a humorous and entertaining way. And it's just been so wonderful. And everyone, please do order Finding Mr. Perfectly Fine if you haven't already. And please do follow Tasneem so you can find out exactly what happens in her second book, as we haven't been a preview yet.
Thank you so much for having me. Honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm so grateful to you guys at the Aziz Foundation for giving me this opportunity to go back at the age of 37 and to do my master's. Like I never thought that'd be possible. And I'm so happy. So thank you. I'll be eternally grateful.
Oh, thank you so much. And everyone, please do follow Tasneem so you can find out all about her journey. And as you tell from the comments, I don't know if you've seen the chat, Tasneem, you've had some fantastic comments. It's been really, really great to talk to you. And